The Lord be with you. This is the reading of the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus crossed the Sea of Galilee to the shore of Tiberias. A vast crowd kept following him because they saw the signs he was performing for the sick. Jesus then went up the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. The Jewish feast of Passover was near. And when Jesus looked up and caught sight of the vast crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" Philip replied, "Not even with 200 days' wages could we buy loaves enough to give each one of them a mouthful." Andrew remarked to Jesus, "There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and a couple of dried fish. But what good is that for so many?" Jesus said, "Get the people to recline." And even though the men numbered about 5,000, there was plenty of grass for them to find a place on the ground. Jesus then took the loaves of bread, gave thanks, passed them around to those reclining. He did the same with the dried fish, as much as they wanted. And when they had had enough, he told his disciples, "Gather up the crusts that are left over, so that there will be nothing that will go to waste." And at this, they gathered 12 baskets full of pieces left over by those who had been fed with the 5 barley loaves. And when the people saw the sign that Jesus had performed, they began to say, "This is undoubtedly the prophet who came into the world." And at that, Jesus realized they would come and carry him off to make him king. So he fled back to the mountain alone. The Gospel of the Lord. Every 3 years at this time of the year, during the year of the Gospel of Mark, the lectionary takes us away from the Gospel of Mark and for 5 Sundays in a row brings us to the Gospel of John, specifically the 6th chapter of the Gospel of John, which we will hear proclaimed in 5 installments starting today. So if you want to know what the rest of the 6th chapter is, beyond reading it yourself, which is a very good thing to do, but if you want to hear about it and what it has to say, particularly to Catholics, you have to come back for 5 Sundays in a row. Just letting you know. The 6th chapter of the Gospel of John begins with the story that is told in all 4 Gospels, the story of the multiplication of the loaves and the fish. And there are some variations on the story, but that's not so much the point. What it is a story. It's critical for the rest of the 6th chapter. John's 6th chapter goes for over 60 verses. And it's all about who Jesus is. Okay? So this story sets that up. And it's really only in the Gospel of John that every miracle that Jesus did, no matter what the miracle was, whether it was healing this disease or that disease, whether it was exorcising this demon or that demon, whether it was multiplying loaves and fish, walking on water. You name the miracle that Jesus did. And every one of them, John calls them signs. Calls them signs. And John declared that the reason why there were 5,000 men following Jesus around the lake, around the Sea of Galilee, which is a lot bigger than our lake, by the way. Okay. So following around was a hike for 5,000. And it says that they did that because they saw the signs that Jesus did for the sick. That these miraculous signs, that they just captivated the 5,000 people up there in Galilee. And they wanted to see more. They wanted to see what other signs does Jesus have to perform. They were just fascinated and attracted. And it was like Jesus had this magnetic presence of signs. For those of us who are old enough and have been Catholic long enough, there was a singular definition for what a sacrament was. No matter which sacrament it was, all 7 sacraments. There was a fundamental definition for what a sacrament was, and we all learned it in our Baltimore Catechism. And it was what? We're the same age, so I can pick on him over here. A sacrament. We went to grade school together. St. Francis Xavier and St. Joe. A sacrament is an outward sign instituted by Christ to give grace. Okay, all sacraments are outward signs instituted by Christ to give grace. Amen? So, you think there's a connection between this gospel, which calls all these miracles signs, which were outward signs. What is an outward sign? An outward sign is a sign you can see, a sign you can hear, a sign you can smell, you can taste, and you can touch. It's a sign that we receive by our senses. It's a physical sign. Okay? And it comes by the hands of Christ. Christ instituted that sign. Christ instituted those miracles, instituted those exorcisms, instituted multiplying loaves and fish as signs. And the whole purpose of the sign was to what? Was to give grace. And what is grace? I'm sorry? I'm not picking on you, Carl. The supernatural power of God. Because God is supernatural and all-powerful. And so grace comes directly from God. Can't come from any other source. Comes from God. And is there any place in God's creation without grace? Is there any place on the planet, Earth, that is without grace? Is there any person on planet Earth without grace? Can anything exist without grace? The supernatural power of God was released in all creation. We call God our creator. There is one creator. There is one God. So all creation is graced by the very fact that it exists. Okay? By the very fact it exists. But these signs were very specific and coming from the hands of this one person, Jesus of Nazareth. And they had a very specific purpose for everyone who saw them, who heard them, who smelled them, who tasted them, who touched them. Every person who witnessed the sign was to receive a grace. It's like every one of us who come into this church right here this morning, okay? We were to receive a grace when we walk through the door. This is a real Catholic thing that we believe. You know, when we walk in the door of the church, we are in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament in our tabernacle. So just to be here is grace. Before we get to the Word, before we get to the table, to be here is a grace. Okay? Which we need. Which we need. Okay? And the grace is offered. The grace is here. Anybody who walks through the door, anybody. You could be a heathen, you could be a pagan, you could be an atheist. Anybody who walks through that door, the grace is here. But is the receptivity here? Amen? The receptivity is an act of will. Is an act of attention. You know, that's why when I start the Mass, I said, let us give Jesus our undivided attention. Because we haven't yet. Unless we've been here at prayer. Okay? That's what get called giving Jesus our undivided attention, is to be at prayer. Now, okay, going back to old-time Catholicism, those of us who are old enough and been Catholic long enough, we may not remember all of our catechism answers, but we do remember that we had to fast from midnight, from food, and if we're really old enough, and water. Okay? Which is the only reason why Catholic churches did not have bathrooms. Did you know that? This church was built without indoor plumbing. Now, Gallatin had indoor plumbing in 1950. This church could have had indoor plumbing, could have had a bathroom, but why would you have a bathroom? You didn't need it. Because everybody had been fasting from food or water from midnight. They didn't need a bathroom. What was the purpose of the fast? What was the purpose of the fast? Did it have to do with sin and guilt? No. The purpose of the fast goes back to Judaism and early Christianity and monasticism and mysticism. It all goes back to our spiritual roots. That you start with the physical in order to arrive at the spiritual. You start by fasting from physical food, from physical water, to make you hungry, to make your body hungry and thirsty in order for you to get in touch with the hunger and thirst of your soul. That's the spirituality of fasting, in a nutshell. Okay? So, the receptivity of the sign is to receive it not just on a physical level, but on a spiritual level. So for those 5,000 people to not only get in touch with their physical hunger for that bread and that fish, but to get in touch with their spiritual hunger, which is the sole purpose of Jesus being on this planet. The sole purpose of the incarnation is to save our souls so that we can recreate a new and better creation, a new and a better humanity from the inside out, from our souls out. So we didn't come here this morning fasting from midnight. I didn't. Okay. We have to have other ways and means for us to go from the physical to the spiritual. Okay? In this Mass and this week, and for 5 Masses and 5 weeks, this would be a very good focus for the self-awareness of each and every one of us, is to get more in touch with the hunger and thirst of our souls. At this point in my life, with whatever is happening or not happening in my life, my circle of living, what does my soul need? What is my soul crying out for? And am I paying attention? Am I listening to the voice of my own soul? My soul's trying to talk to me, but I may not be paying attention at all because I'm too distracted by all these other things, all these other demands, all these other expectations. Do you find yourself being that way? I find myself being that way. That goes back to another spiritual principle that is certainly goes back to Judaism and early Christianity and mysticism and monasticism. It has to do with silence and solitude. Silence and solitude. That we basically turn the game off, turn the music off, turn our electronic devices off, and just be in silence and solitude. You can do that on a dock, by the way. You can do that at sunrise or sunset, in the shade. We can do that if it's important enough, if we have the presence of mind enough. We can do that. And we will be rewarded with grace.